gonna get started with this. Hi everyone, welcome to the Urban Sewing Society, where we bring fashion and creativity to your neighborhood. My name is Jen and I am the Urban Sewist, and welcome to my channel. Thanks for tuning in again. If this is your first time tuning into my channel, please click that subscribe button below and click on that bell so that you can get an update every time I release a new video. I typically release videos on Fridays, usually late morning, early afternoon. So if you like this video, definitely give me a thumbs up. So this video is the long-awaited sew-along for the Hazel coat by Moodfabrics. So if you recall, a couple weeks back, I did a video, and I'll link it below, that talked about all of these free patterns that are out there for you to download at home, tape together, cut out, and create these beautiful designs at home. Well, this was one of my favorites. And the reason that I like this one is because it was easy, it was quick, and it's super, super versatile. So this is the Hazel coat. And I, of course, everything that I do is gonna be upcycled, repurposed, recycled some kind of way. I received this huge bolt of seafoam green wool fabric from Share House here in Chicago, and I will link them below, because what Share House does is they collect textiles from all across the city from people who are looking to get rid of textiles and don't want them to go into the landfill. They collect them and they give them away. And so I have been so happy to spend weekend after weekend going through all of the treasures that Share House has been holding on to. So one weekend I was at the Share House site and I saw this bolt of seafoam green, which is one of my favorite colors. And I saw it and I was like, instantly, I need to make a coat out of this. And so I grabbed it. And there were some other people there. Luckily, they didn't ask me for a piece of it. So I was able to bring the whole bolt home and do with it what I wanted. So I have this bolt of fabric, and this is what I'm using to make the Hazel coat out of. And then for my lining, I am using this steel gray bridal satin, which is also known as potosoie satin. It's a really heavy bridal satin, and I love it. It gives the perfect kind of weight to the coat. It really helps define the coat, and I just love the ease of sliding my arms in and how it feels. It also gives that extra little layer of protection, because here in Chicago it's really, really cold. And even though I'm not going to wear this when the temperatures are below zero, I would like to wear this coat when it's somewhere between like 40, 45, maybe high 30s, and it's perfect for that. So you'll notice that I did a few things different with this pattern that are different from the way the pattern is presented to you by Moodfabrics. So I changed the pockets. I removed the patch pockets. I ended up not liking the way they turned out, even though I tried to embellish them a little bit. It still wasn't really feeling that. And I put side pockets in. Additionally, I added a Nehru collar because I wanted to have something up on my neck. And then I also added some fabric to the sleeves. So there's so much that you can do with this. I really ask you to be creative and think of all the things that you can do. And I wanted to do more, but I really wanted to get this coat done so that you could see it and so that you could see my process and sew along. So hopefully you have printed out your pattern. You have taped the pieces together. You then cut it out. and now you are ready to sew along with me. All right, and I tried to keep this video within 30 minutes and I just barely made it. So I hope that this is helpful. If you have any questions, please put them below. If you decide to make this, by all means, please tag me and let me know. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook. On Instagram, I have a few more pictures of the coat. If you scroll through, you'll see some of those pictures. But if you try this out and you try some of these techniques, please let me know. I would love to see what you come up with. All right, so let's get right into it. All right, so we have the pattern pieces here. One of the things that I tend to do is keep the additional sizes of the pattern included on the pattern piece. So you'll see here how I have cut the patterns at the largest size, and that is intentional. Just in case I want to make it for somebody else later, or I want to do something different, like make a puffer coat or something, I'll need that extra seam allowance. So there are a total of 5 pieces that you want to be looking for. You've got the pocket, which is probably the second smallest piece. And then you have the neck facing, which looks like a C shape. And then you have the front facing that's going to go down the front of the coat. And then you have the coat front as well as the coat back. So again, very simple, very few pieces, very easy to get started on this. So here we go. All right, we're going to get started with laying out this fabric. And I laid it out selvage to selvage. And when I put the pattern pieces on top, it didn't fit. So I ended up taking the fabric and opening it up the wide way and folding over with the selvages at the top and the bottom, and that worked out a lot better. Just note that this pattern is one full piece for the back and one full piece for the front, so you will need to have wide enough fabric to accommodate both pieces. Now, I could not pin down the pattern pieces to the fabric because I use this really thick stock paper, and it's really hard to get a pin through it. So I ended up using some weighted objects to hold the pattern pieces down to the fabric. So you see me here cutting and using these really heavy cups, a jewelry box, a craft box, lots of different objects to cut around these pieces. Once I'm done cutting these pieces, I just put them to the side and then start working on the lining. But before that, I want you to know that I ended up adding about 4 inches to the bottom of both my front and back because I wanted my jacket to be longer than the pattern specified. So for me, it was really important to have a longer jacket. Conversely, if you want to shorten it, I would just fold the pattern right in the middle, fold it over, and then still continue to use the lower portion of the pattern so that it falls correctly. Whenever I make coats, I like to use a really heavyweight bridal satin. I had this bridal satin left over from a project that I created, must have been about 10 years ago. And I thought this would be a perfect contrast to the jacket. So here I am cutting out the back piece. And I did not open the fabric up the wide way like I did the fabric for the jacket. So my sleeves ended up being a little bit shorter. So I just added on a little, like maybe 3 or 4 inches extra. And you'll see that as we go a little further down the line. So here is the front. I'm adding the additional 4 inches at the bottom of the jacket. And then I realized that the facing needs to be removed from the jacket because I've already cut a front facing for the jacket and the lining only goes to the facing. So I fold it back and then I just cut around it. Here you see my sleeves, where I told you I had to add that extra, maybe it was like 3 or 4 inches onto the end of the sleeve. So I ended up doing that. Now here I am creating a belt. The pattern does not come with a belt, but I wanted a belt, so I pieced some of my extra fabric together. And now I am cutting my interfacing. I am using armor weft interfacing, which is a heavier interfacing that you use for coats and heavy blazers. And I will link a description. I will link it in the description below. The other great thing that I had going on here was these little scraps of fabric that I picked up from Share House. Fortunately, these squares, which were discarded from upholstery fabric from a local place here in Chicago, fortunately the color matched my fabric almost exactly. And so I knew I wanted to have some contrast. So I thought first on the collar would be perfect. So I put a piece aside that I would use for the collar, and I cut that. Then I thought maybe I'll put a little trim around the pockets, and maybe I'll put a little trim on the belt and the sleeves. So I played around with these pieces for a little bit to see what was going to fit where. This fabric has a pattern to it. It looks like little blossoms, and I wanted the blossoms to go in the correct direction. So I played around with the pieces on the sleeve until I found where it fit perfectly. And then I cut that portion for the bottom part of the sleeve. Now the first step is to sew down the back of the jacket. So the 2 back pieces of the jacket, right sides together, sew straight down the back. Then next I decided to work on the belt because I knew I was going to add some additional fabric to it. I basically just stitched my scraps together, pressed the seams open, and then folded it over and pulled it through. Next I am working on the pockets, and basically you're putting right sides together. You're sewing down each side and the bottom, making sure you push those corners out really good. I would suggest pressing. You can also check out moodfabrics. They give you a really nice step-by-step of how to make and create these pockets. They're very easy. They're very nice because I love them because they are self-lined. Well, I use lining on the inside, and it really makes the pocket nice. Next, I am going to attach the interfacing to the back facing. And now I am placing the back facing on the back of the lining. Now this is not the way the pattern explains for you to do it, but this is the way I decided to do it because I wanted more weight in my lining. And so I put the facing, I placed it right on the back and stitched it down. Here you see I am adding the extension onto my sleeve, and now I'm attaching the facing to the interfacing. I am not using fusible interfacing, so I actually had to stitch all the way around. Not a huge inconvenience, but if you can find this interfacing in fusible, it will make it easier for you because you'll just need to press it. When I first started sewing, there was no fusible interfacing. Okay, so now you can see how I am attaching the facing to the lining front, sewing all the way down. Please keep in mind, once you stitch down a seam, you want to make sure to press that to one side, pressing it down, using a weighted object to make sure that it lays nice and flat. Now here I ended up having to go back and lay my pattern piece on top of the front of the jacket, the front piece of the jacket, to mark the location of the pocket. So I forgot to do that before I lifted the pattern up off of the fabric. So what I did, laid the pattern on top of the jacket. You want to take those straight pins and stick them through the pattern onto the fabric, and then I am using a erasable pencil that I can create my little marks on my fabric. And these little marks that I'm making, they come right out with a little brush on the end of the pencil. I will link in the description below where you can purchase this pencil, and it's really great for transferring marks. Now, after I've placed the marks, I am now lining my pocket up with those marks and then pinning it down. This is really important because you want to make sure that this pocket is on nice and straight. And mine actually turned out really good. But once I sewed it on, I still thought it looked a little too plain. So I ended up doing a little something extra, and you'll see that a little later. Now here's the pocket sewn down. You want to make your stitches really close to the edge. Okay, so here we have the facing attached to the lining, the front attached to the back at the shoulders, and the next step is going to be to sew from the neck down to the wrist. So I have pinned everything together. My interfacing did not come up to the top edge, but that's okay because I actually end up stitching over it. So you can see there's a little discrepancy there, but it falls within the seam allowance, so that is no problem at all. So now I am just going to stitch across the top, but I wanted you to see how this looks on the inside after it's been pressed and everything. It really looks nice on the inside. Now the next step is sewing across from the sleeve bottom to the neck, and you'll notice that my sleeve is really, it has a jagged edge there at the bottom, but I ended up trimming that off so that it would be nice and smooth on the inside of the jacket. Now we're just going down the other shoulder, starting from the neck, being sure to pull those pins out on the way down and backstitch at the end so that it doesn't come apart. When you get done, it should look like this. This is your lining attached to the facing. I'm gonna just show you the seams here and how that all looks. It looks very nice and neat. I'm going to take a few moments here just to slide into it unfinished, but just to get a sense of the length to make sure that I'm okay with the length. My next step is going to be to put the pockets on, and I did want you to see how I added the fabric to the sleeves. I thought that made a really nice contrast on the jacket, and so you can see those sleeves here. So next will be to sew from the bottom all the way up. Now I'm going to work on these pockets. I decided that I wanted to add a little something extra, so you see me here making a little 1-inch panel that I sewed on each side of the pocket. And after I did that, I took the pockets and sewed them onto the jacket. Continuing to match up the corners to the dots, you can see here where I sewed the patch pocket down to the front of the jacket. My next step will be to sew the sides of the jacket. And then here I am sewing the sides of the jacket. When you come around the curve, the underarm curve, be sure to reinforce the stitching in the underarm curve and clip in the curves. That is really important so that you don't have buckling. Now I'm taking the jacket to the dress form so that you can see how it looks. And then this was also an easier way for me to match up the lining with the jacket. It's just easier that way for me. Then I go back to the sewing machine now, and I'm going to stitch my lining to my jacket. You can see here where I am pinning at the neck. I'm also including the collar at the neck. I wanted to make sure that my collar fit in there perfectly. I did end up having to shave off about 1/2 inch just so that the collar could fit in. Now that it's all pinned together, I am attaching the collar, sewing through all layers. Once this is sewn together, you want to be sure to clip to the seam so that that curve and that fabric can lay down nice and flat. Okay, then our next step is to sew the front of the jacket at the front facing, and then what I ended up doing was doing a little bit of a edge stitch or an understitch, an edge stitch or an understitch right at the front, and this keeps the front part of the jacket and the facing from becoming misaligned. So this is really an important step, to do that edge stitch. So now I am taking you a little bit slower through this process because I really want you to be able to see the edge stitch. Like I said, this is really important because if you don't do this, even though you'll take it to the ironing board and you're going to press the facing to the inside, when this starts to roll out, it looks really unprofessional. So this edge stitch is important. Okay, so here you can see I am taking my scissors and I'm clipping inside the collar to make sure that there's enough room for the fabric to lay down nice and smooth. And I'm also getting rid of a few of the extra threads. And then I'm going to flip it over, and you can see that it looks much better. It lays nice and flat. I'm also stitching around the sleeves. So I've pulled the sleeves to the inside so that I could stitch my sleeves and then tuck them back inside the jacket. Everything matches up really, really well, and I'm really pleased with the way the sleeves turned out. The seams match up really well. Again, you don't have to make this contrast, and when you follow the Mood Fabrics directions, it's clearly not in there, but everything should match up really well. Okay, so I'm just taking my time here to sew the lining to the sleeve and then pull it through. And as you can see here, ideally I'd love to be able to go in there and do an understitch, but I just pressed it really good. I wanted you to see how these pockets turned out, and I didn't like them at all. So I went back to my fabric and my lining, and I cut out pockets to go in the side seams. Yep, I did that. Here you see me pressing out the belt and then pressing the facing. You can see where I did the understitch, and I think it's really important to use a lot of steam and a lot of pressure to press down around the collars, on the facing, make sure those corners are pushed out nice and flat. Another thing to keep in mind when you're pressing, take your time. Use your fingers to maneuver the fabric to make sure that it lays flat. And now you can see here where I'm going in. I have not removed the patch pockets yet. I'm going in and I am removing, using my seam ripper, and I am removing. I'm going in to open up the seams in the same location as the patch pocket. That way I know that my pockets, my side pockets, will be placed in the correct location. So I go in, I put my lining in, I put my fabric in, and then I sew my pockets in. All right, so we are almost done. This is a really happy part because we're getting close to the end. So I sew my pockets in. Lining I put in the back, and the front part, actually it's just the reverse. I used the lining in the back and the fabric on the front piece. And I needed to go back in and open up the lining because now I'm going to sew the bottom hem. And once I sew the hem, the jacket is closed and I wouldn't be able to turn it right side out. So I had to make a little slit in the lining seam so that I could do that. Okay, I just want to take a minute to show you what I did here. So after I sewed the hem in, I turned the jacket inside out, and I wanted to make sure that I had done everything correctly. So I pushed my corners out really good, nice and flat. And then I laid it out so that I could see where the lining was on the jacket. And I put some pins in there and I tried the jacket on to make sure there wasn't any pulling in the lining. This is really important to do. And voila, it is done. I am super pleased with the way this jacket turned out. In fact, I may make another one. It just looks so stylish. I love the pastels in the wintertime. I paired it with white boots. I paired it with beige boots. I paired it with this thrifted handbag that is by Coach. I also paired it with some gloves to give it an even more classy look. I love the way the belt turned out with the little hint of the contrast on the belt. The lining just is such a nice touch. It makes the coat go on and come off so easy. I could not be more pleased with this. I love the flowiness of it. The pockets, I'm glad I took those patch pockets off. They just didn't work for me, but I encourage you to do this the way you will love it. Thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.